another episode of the Zilosophy podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I'm super casual today, sitting by the pool in my Zildjian tank top, repping my cousins that run the family business. If you like what you're seeing and hearing, please subscribe to the podcast. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It means a lot to have your support, and I can't do it without you. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Fresh Food to Go by Zildjian Catering right here in Sarasota, Florida. If you know someone that's high risk or can't get out and needs a healthy meal, call or go online to Fresh Food to Go by Zildjian Catering. They offer curbside pickup and contactless delivery, and they have great food. Not just saying that because it's my brother and my sister-in-law. The food is amazing. Baked ziti, chicken kebabs, falafel, some of the Corvina tacos are some of the things on the menu this week and next. The menu changes every 2 weeks. You can call them at 941-363-1709, or you can order online at zildjiancatering.com. Click on Fresh Food to Go. Support your small businesses in your neighborhood, whether it's restaurants or delivery people or anything. We need to help each other to keep going. Speaking of help each other to keep going, I've got a GoFundMe that I launched last week. It's free Zilosophy talks for heroes, kids, and families on lockdown. I'm not a therapist, but I do play one on TV. If you've seen my show, Zilosophy TV, with Uncle Z and friends. But I help with what I write and what I talk about on the podcast helps a lot of people mentally. I'm trying to help people. This is a really difficult time for a lot of people. I just got on a call yesterday. Actually, Old School Bobby did with the Lopez boys out of Lexington. Antonio, Diego, and Santiago, 14, 11, and 6 years old, and been piled on top of each other for 5 weeks now, and mostly dealing with it fine. But they needed a few laughs and a little perspective on that. They have a unique opportunity to enjoy each other right now. Roommates are annoying, whether they're your brothers or not, and so we had a good, fun conversation about that. So that's the type of stuff that's going on. Did a video for Tatum Ridge Elementary School, did the podcast. The last podcast you saw or heard was Pro Kids in San Diego. That was all funded by that GoFundMe, so could use your support there. Zilosophy TV with Uncle Z and Friends is on YouTube. The pilot and episode 1 are up. I'm finally a couple segments into editing on episode 2. You can look for that on YouTube, and you can also call your local community cable station and ask them to air it on their local station by downloading it on the Telview Media Exchange. So please do that. Zilosophy on Golf is my book. It's available on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. It's a great gift for the philosopher or golfer in your life. If you want a signed copy, you can email me at info@zilosophy.org or message me on social media at zilosophy4all. Whew! Today's guest is Peter Miller, an amazing filmmaker. One of the best I've ever seen. I'm not just saying that because he's my friend. In fact, I'd say we became good friends because I was so impressed by his filmmaking. He worked for Ken Burns on Jazz. He was a producer on that. That's how we met. He's made his own films, Aka Doc Pomus, Sacco and Vanzetti, Jews and Baseball. We talk about some of those. He's got a new one that's out on PBS that he produced called Bedlam. And he's working on a new film about Marcella Hazan, who is this famous Italian, has one of the most famous Italian cookbooks. Anyway, the reason I love him so much is not just because he's a great human being, but he tells stories about human beings that are very human and very raw and not always pretty. But he always finds the bright light in each human story to share, and that's why I love him so much. His stories are great. He's a great person. We actually, at the end of the podcast, even got into a little bit of an intense discussion about politics, because he's a person who really cares about people and really cares about his beliefs in raising up humanity and uplifting good people so that we can help each other. And although we don't always agree, we had a discussion that sort of demonstrated that we are good friends. I know him. I know he's a good human being. I know he cares so deeply about people that it gets him very frustrated at times. And I allowed us to get into a little bit of an intense discussion about that because I wanted to demonstrate that people can vehemently disagree on certain things, even things that they care a lot about, and still relate to each other based on their humanity. I love him as a person. I know he cares about people, so he can say almost anything to me, and it's not going to change my love for him. And I wanted to demonstrate that as an example of me really trying to live that in my life and hoping that you're doing the same out there, that we don't always have to agree, but we should always respect and love each other no matter what. And I hope and pray that that's what we can do. Anyway, there's a great discussion about all kinds of things, not just that, about his films, about baseball, about all kinds of stuff. So, coming up, amazing documentarian, my friend, Peter Miller.
Maybe it's not too late. Maybe you could make my world a brighter place.
All right, so here we are with famed filmmaker and my good friend, Peter Miller of Willow Pond Films. Hi, Peter.
Very nice to see you.
It's great to see you. I'm sorry to be slightly rubbing in my beautiful background in your face while you're hunkered down in New York.
I have a beautiful background too. I think New York is beautiful. I mean, I know that where you are there with the palm trees and the swimming pool and the sunshine and all of that, but there's something about New York that is really special. And I'm pleased to be here, though under the circumstances, it's a challenging place to be.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, since I started going there for business in the late 90s, early 2000s, I realized that, you could feel the energy when you go into New York. And I started to tell friends or clients who had never been there, you need to go to Times Square. You'll be standing in the aorta of the country. And I still believe that, although the aorta of our country has got a bit of an illness that's pretty serious. And you're right there in the heart of it. And before we get into your films and your filmmaking, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, this, as I told you off air, this is just two friends catching up. We haven't talked in quite a while. So I really want to hear, like, from your side of the story, what's going on there? What's it like? Is it scary? Is it depressing? Is it uplifting? And it's all of that, right? That's what your films are about, the mixture of the human condition.
Yeah, it is scary. It's depressing. It's inspiring. It's all those things. Uh, the thing that makes New York wonderful, the thing that I love about New York is how many human beings are packed into a tight space, and how we have to deal with each other all the time. So when I walk out of my building, I live on the 11th floor of an apartment building. I go down the elevator, I see lots of other people. I see the doorman who works there. I see my neighbors. I go out on the street. I pass by vast numbers of people. You go to get around town, you don't drive, you get in a subway where you cram in with all these other bodies. We can't do that right now, which is very frustrating, but it is what makes this town wonderful. And I think it's also socially and politically important. We see other humans. We see people who come from very different backgrounds,
Yeah.
and we deal with each other every day. And I think it creates a sense of shared humanity that the rest of the country and the rest of the world could benefit from, and it's, my neighborhood. I live in a residential neighborhood in the Upper West Side. I walk out my door, I go by the hardware stores run by a wonderful Yemeni family, the dry cleaner are people who come from Korea, the bagel store, Lenny's Bagels, is run by people from Thailand.
Mm.
They make fantastic bagels.
Okay.
You've got the lady, who made tamales, who's selling them on the corner that you go by. The entire universe, or at least the entire world, is represented as you walk from my house to the subway. And then you get in the subway, and it's people from everywhere. And that is what I love about New York. I just love that we are together. People from, countries that are nowhere near each other are near each other. We learn from each other. We love that. And right now, in the middle of this pandemic, social distancing is the opposite of what New York City is. We are socially connected.
Right. That's incredibly beautifully said, not surprisingly, as a great storyteller and filmmaker that you are. But you really just encapsulated it so incredibly. I love what you said at the beginning. We have to deal with each other all the time. And isn't that a great lesson for humanity right now? We've built this false sense of security that we're disconnected and that we don't have to deal with each other and that we can do and say whatever we want and it doesn't affect anybody else. And they've got to deal with their own thing and I've got to deal with mine. We're disconnected. And that's just not true. And I think what you just said is New York proves that that's not true.
No, and so does every other great city in the world.
Sure.
You know, but we're
London's a great example of that. I feel in many ways that ironically, London became the dream that New York and the United States was supposed to be. It's such an amazing melting pot where there's great acceptance of varying cultures and thought process and political views and whatever. But I think that, you know, maybe my thinking about that is a little bit flawed. I think what you're saying is that's still going on in New York, and maybe we're not paying attention enough to the melting pot that it is.
yeah, though, you know, for all of my sunny "we're all in this together" thing, New York is a terribly unequal place, like the rest of the country. We have people who are insanely wealthy. We have skyscrapers going up all around us that have like one apartment per floor so that people can have 360-degree views. You know, they're mostly oligarchs, they're billionaires, they're people who live there a day or two out of the year, you know, who have so much money they don't know what to do with it. And meanwhile, down on the street, there are people who don't have homes. There are people who are struggling to make ends meet. There are people who are crammed into apartments trying to make a living, you know, in a terribly unequal culture. And so for all of the "we're together" part, you know, there's a lot of things that we really need to work on. New York is a racially segregated place still. You know, our school system is wonderful. You know, 1 million kids in the public schools, but the schools are really segregated. You have schools that have very different populations in them. You have neighborhoods that are very different. But at the same time, just the geography of a big city is you pass by each other, you interact with each other, you work with each other, you eat with each other, you participate. You know, when I think about what it is about living in New York, and I think it would be true of London or Toronto or wherever you find yourself, is so much of it has to do with what I love about this place is the food. You know, I can find amazing bagels and amazing Chinese food. I can go to Flushing, which is a neighborhood out in Queens. It's always been an immigrant neighborhood. My Jewish relatives lived out there for, you know, generations. You go there now, it's like every nation of Asia is represented and every cuisine of Asia is represented. I don't just go for Chinese food. You have Chinese food from 20 regions and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Because the people who are eating it are from those regions. So you can taste stuff that you never taste before here. And I just think that is the most vibrant. You know, people talk about Disneyland or Disney World, the happiest place on earth. To me, Flushing Main Street, that's the happiest place on earth.
That's great. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me the amount of choices of cuisine in New York City. I mean, every time I go there, I'm literally almost knocked over and astonished by the level, the amount and quality of choices that you have there. And I think that food is a great reflection of what's going on there in the melting pot that it still is. And like I said, maybe we're not paying enough attention to the dream of New York and the dream of America, that we've sort of lost our way. And part of that is, again, like I said, we've convinced ourselves that we're not connected. And I've said basically on every podcast that I've done since this thing started that the big lesson here is we can no longer deny that we're all connected. It's been factually proven to us how connected we are by how fast this thing has spread, and realizing that the things that we do and say right now have a great effect on others.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and maybe we should be more cognizant of that in our regular way of being, and be more appreciative of the connection that we have. You know, I've said for a long time that we're in this together. That's sort of the new buzz thing. So I think people sort of think I'm getting caught up in that. But if you go back and listen, I've been saying and writing for a long time, we're in this together. Maybe we should start acting like
Yeah,
it.
for
And,
sure.
and I think and hope and pray that that's what we get out of this incredible tragedy. You said hundreds of people dying. I was in New York 5 weeks ago. I told you off air. The last thing I did, the city was about to get shut down that Monday. I went to Smith Street Bagels in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn at
Mhm.
6 a.m. First one in the door, got the first dozen bagels, got on the road and got out of town because I had a sense that it was getting bad. And also I needed to get to Florida because I thought, well, this would probably be the safest place to be stuck.
And you needed some bagels.
And I needed some bagels. Well, I had to bring some to the family. And of course, they didn't all make it. There were a few that
You
disappeared.
needed some fuel. So yeah.
There were a few that disappeared on the way. But, to see such a great American city uh, just go through something so tragic. I mean, we've all heard about, and some of us have seen. I'm not a big news watcher. I'm not sure if you know that, but I've at least heard about the refrigerator trucks out on the streets that are acting as morgues. I mean, what a terrible thing to see in your neighborhood.
Yeah, we have. I just, we stay inside, and really, social distancing is not about. I mean, it is protecting us, but it's really protecting our neighbors, it's protecting old folks, vulnerable people. I stay in. If everyone stays in, it helps people who are going to be susceptible to this disease, more susceptible. So we try not to go out too much, but you sometimes lose your mind and you really have to get out. We took a walk in Central Park, beautiful city park, springtime, all the flowers blooming, and there in the middle of it all are tents that have been set up outside of Mount Sinai Hospital on Fifth Avenue for overflow patients. We've got hospital tents. It looks like a photo from the Civil War. We've got hospital tents in Central Park dealing with overflow patients, COVID patients, in the greatest city in America and one of the greatest cities in the world. It's just mind blowing. And refrigerator trucks and doctors who are, working in their own fields who have been pressed into service, working in COVID wards, people who haven't intubated a patient and since their residency are being pressed into service to do this kind of work. The heroism of our neighbors, medical providers, uh, drivers, janitors, food deliverers, the people who are not like me lucky enough to be able to just stay in and socially distance is just unbelievable. And maybe the one silver lining, and there are no real silver linings in any of this, is that every night at 7 o'clock, our neighborhood and every other neighborhood in New York City, and I don't know if this is happening around the country, but I know it's here, every night people lean out their windows and cheer and clap and bang pots and pans and whoop on behalf of the people who are out there risking their lives to keep things together. It is so moving that, we cry every night and we cheer.
That's great. I was actually going to ask you that question. What's the one silver lining? Because to me, I think there's a lot of beautiful silver linings in this. And that doesn't take away from the horrific reality of it. But there are great lessons to be learned. There are great moments of heroism. There are great moments of unity and connection. And I think yours sort of described all of that all in one. And I just did, I turned you on to Eli Paperboy Reed. I did a podcast with him last week, and he said the same thing, that moment every night at 7 o'clock is really special for them. And I think it's great too, because, it is such an important part of our country and our DNA as Americans, New York City. And to have that daily reminder that you guys are all connected is pretty cool, even though you can't be together.
Yeah, we are. We look out the window and we see people in an apartment building across the street. We don't really know them. There's like thousands of people on my block, but I'm getting to know them by cheering every night with them at seven
Right.
o'clock.
Right.
And I'm happy for this. And I know that there's like dingbats in the country, and I hope there aren't very many of them who are protesting and saying, "Open up the economy." These fools and dummies. Who are thinking only of themselves and not even thinking long term about themselves, thinking about what they want in the next 10 minutes. I'd really love to go bowling. Well,
Right.
get over it. Get over it. There are people who are putting their lives on the line.
Bowling alleys are the dirtiest places during the best days. Why do you want to go there? That's what I don't
It's like,
understand.
wait a minute, go bowling in the fall or the winter. You'll miss it that much more and you'll appreciate it that much more.
Well,
But
that's what I wanted to get to. You just said, I mean, that's another beautiful silver lining. You live in a place where there's so many people piled on top of each other. You can't really know everybody. But now through this, ironically, by being forced to be away from each other, you're meeting more people and learning about your neighbors more than you would normally when you just got your blinders on and going to get your whatever cuisine of the day is for you that day, or whatever else you're doing, going to film something, right?
yeah, I mean, it's a sweet thing, and it is frustrating being a filmmaker in the middle of all this because what I want to do is be out watching things happen, and I can't get out to do it. I mean, happily, I've got projects I'm in the thick of that I can take care of from home, but we want to be documenting. It's not really safe to be documenting right now.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I was thinking about that actually a few minutes ago as you were talking. Like, there'd be such a great film for you to make about this, but you can't because you have to put yourself and others at risk to do it.
Yeah. I am actually towards the tail end of working on a film about palliative care doctors, which I've been working on for the past several years with a couple of good friends. We've been following these young doctors who are learning this wonderful field of medicine, this wonderful discipline where you listen to patients and figure out what it is that they need and want to be comfortable. Some of them are at the end of life, but many of them are just dealing with lifelong chronic diseases. And these doctors who we followed from their fellowship year for years as they learned how to do this work um, are practicing a really humane form of medicine. But some of these folks, who mostly work with people with chronic illnesses and geriatric people, are being pressed into service to work in COVID wards. And
Right.
so we've asked our subjects of this movie to take their iPhones and film themselves.
Wow.
And the material we've been getting back is mind blowing and moving and beautiful. And we have, people who are these idealistic doctors who are, about to go into work and they pick up their phone and they're like, I'm about to go deal with this thing. I don't have enough protective equipment. This isn't something I was trained to do. And here I am. It's very moving. And, uh, you know, it's going to be a part of the story. We never expected that to be a part of our story. We're making a 3-part series for PBS. It'll be on in a couple of years. It was never going to be about a pandemic. It was about how to care for people. But the story has changed. So we are filmmaking kind of remotely.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, it's again, there's so many moving things that come up within this that are great. So it's good to hear that you're a part of it, and that's a good transition. We haven't. I want to talk about your film, so people don't know you out there. They don't. They may not know that you used to work for Ken Burns. That's how we met. You helped produce the jazz series for Ken Burns, which when I watched, was one of those films that really struck me. I'm a big jazz fan, and I loved learning about jazz history. But the thing that was so powerful to that really long, multi-episodic film was that it was the story of racism in America more than it was the story of jazz in America. To me,
Yeah, or the story of race in America.
race. Yeah,
Racism being a part of it.
that's a better way to say it. It wasn't so much about racism as it was about this is the story of race in America and how it's affected us, how we've dealt with it, the good parts of it, the bad parts of it, and how we still struggle with it today. As you
Boy, do
said,
we ever. I mean, it's the folly of, in many ways, of even thinking about, of racism is the greatest art form our country has ever created was created by people who for 300 years were, not, decidedly unfree and treated as horribly as you can treat other people, and somehow created out of this mess and this horror uh, music and art that just changed the world and changed the way we think of the world and enhanced our lives in so many ways. And jazz is an African American art form, but it's also an art form that draws on every kind of music that this country has brought in. So you look at a New Orleans jazz band, with clarinets and trumpets and trombones and the rhythms of some of the rhythms are African American, some of the melodies are Sicilian, some of the brass band traditions come from Europe, some of the tunes they're playing come from the British Isles. You take blues, which is an African American art form, but played on guitars, which come from Spain. You know, it's a beautiful, wonderful amalgam of everything. And so to, you know, that racism exists is one of the dumbest things that I can imagine human beings coming up with. Human beings have come up with some really dumb things, you know, nuclear weapons, racism, you know, I don't know, a few other things. But it's like, really look at what is great in this country. And what's great in this country is the stuff that happened because of people from other parts of the world blending their talents and their geniuses together.
Yeah.
You know, who is the greatest musician who transformed American music more than probably any other musician ever? It's Louis Armstrong. You know, a kid who grew up in an orphanage, basically, you know, from an incredibly poor family, who could not afford a horn, you know, as a kid, who depended on the largesse of strangers and charity, who somehow then went on to create music that not only changed the way that popular music sounded, but changed how we understand rhythm, changed how we understand time. I mean, you can put Louis Armstrong in the same category as Albert Einstein, as a person who has changed the fundamental way we understand
Absolutely.
how time and the world function. I mean, there is genius that came out of that, and it came out of that through, you know, through the experience of somebody who had no reason to, you know, who was the most underprivileged person you could ever imagine.
Well, isn't that in itself the American story, right? Through great challenge and great struggle, somehow we always spit out this amazingly beautiful thing. And again, going back to what's going on now, I certainly hope that that's what happens from this thing, is that through this incredible hardship, we find a higher level of being as Americans and as humans.
Amen to that.
Yeah, and so what you said I thought was really funny. I often sort of ponder in my head, I wonder what the aliens think when they look down at us, silly little monkeys with their racism and their wars still going on. I mean, to me, I'm one of those people. I support tons of military groups and veteran groups because those people make sacrifices on behalf of the greater good. I personally think it's ridiculous that in this day and age, we're still, as human beings, still using war as a way to communicate with each other and negotiate with each other. It's insane. But we do. And there are people that put their lives on the line and change their lives to try and help the greater good. So I think it's important to support them. But in theory, in concept, it's, if you really think about it, it's ridiculous that we still have that as a mechanism of sorting out differences.
Well, I think that one of the, you know, as I think about the movies that I've been lucky enough to work on and make, so much of it has to do with how an understanding of history gives us an understanding of who we are now and how we exist and why things are the way they are now. And I think that Americans are oftentimes foolishly immune to the necessity of history in their lives. They don't get that knowing history is so elemental to creating a better life right now. And we are, I mean, think about, you know, what are we as a human body? Our cells have all replaced themselves over and over again. We're not the same bunch of material that we were when we were born. We are, you know, the product of experience. We're the product of history. We're the product of what our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents and people who changed the world in which we live went through. Everything that, you know, I come from people who were Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe around the turn of the 20th century. Why is my family in the United States? They're in the United States because there was horrible brutality happening against Jewish people in Russia and the Ukraine and that part of the world, people fleeing to get themselves safe here. And my grandparents who came over and worked their butts off in order to create a place that my parents could exist in, and my parents working their butts off to create a place that I could be in, but also passing along values and things that they learned along the way. I grew up at the beginning of this and the thick of the civil rights movement. That history shapes the world in which we exist. If we don't learn this stuff, if we don't learn about wars that we fought that were necessary, wars that we fought that were stupid, wars that we fought that were unbelievably brutal, if we don't learn about that stuff, how do we look at tomorrow and figure out how to deal with stuff? Knowing our past is a medically necessary part of survival.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken up a saying that we can't know where we're going if we don't know where we've been. I often say that in the context of, I have a couple friends who do a lot of pre-Columbian historical research in America, and write books about it. And there's this whole part of history that was before Columbus that's been wiped out of our consciousness, and it's just kind of weird and insane because there's all these things that you can find that like serve as pretty irrefutable proof that some Europeans were here before him, and what were they doing, and why were they here, and how do we just,
we're often doing some pretty terrible stuff too. I mean, and
part of them were, but there's a lot that weren't too. I mean, and again, there's a lot of groups, Templars are known for this, that were here and had pacts with Native Americans that were very respectful of their traditions. And some of the Europeans the first we've heard this from Native American chiefs today who have an oral history that have told us, the first couple waves of Europeans that come over got slaughtered, and the ones that survived, we kept them and we made them a part of our tribe. And then we found a common ground with some of these guys that had a pact of doing things the right way and for the right reasons. And of course, as Europeans that have become Americans, we, generally go too far, and greed gets involved, and sort of that original intent all gets lost. So, but the point is, of all of it, like, we need to know that we need to know the history of all of it, where we came from, why we came here, what it's about, in order to know where we're going, which is what you just said.
Yeah, one of the things that is sad, I mean, there's so many things that are sad. The fact that people are dying and having their lives turned upside down, the economy is in ruins, all of that is so sad, it's hard to comprehend. So it seems small to talk about the loss of baseball, but we have lost baseball this season, or for some substantial part of it, and that's sad. To me, baseball is one of those American institutions that brings people together in a way that it is. America professes to be a meritocracy, but it's often a very unequal place where you really are stuck where you started because you can't get out of it. Baseball is a place where people really do succeed if they're good, and that's it. And so so what you end up with is the team that I love has people from the Dominican Republic, it has people from the American South, it has people from Japan, it has people from wherever the heck you can, Brooklyn, for goodness sakes. It has people from everywhere in America because they're really, really good at what they do. And to me, baseball is also the sport where history is elemental in everything you do. You get up to bat, you remember the last 100 times you faced that pitcher and what they threw to you. That's history. You remember, it's all about acquired knowledge over time and how much you've learned. That's how you get to be good. The more that you look at your experience and learn from it, the better ball player you are. That's history. And I got to make a movie about Jews in baseball a few years ago. It's called Jews in Baseball. You mentioned that I'd worked with Ken Burns. When Ken Burns makes a film about the Civil War, you know what he calls it?
Civil War.
Right. We made a film about baseball. It was called Baseball. I made a film about jazz. It was called Jazz. I made a film on my own called Jews and Baseball, an American Love Story. Why look at that? Is it about, hey, look at this guy's really good first baseman? No, it was about, let's look at what this really good first baseman told us about the immigrant experience in America. What does knowing about Hank Greenberg, the great slugger of the 1930s and 40s, big, strong Jewish guy playing his best ball at a time when Hitler was on the rise in Germany, when there was anti-Semites all over America, when we were about to go to war. Every time he hit a home run, he said he was hitting a home run against Hitler. Every time this big, tall, 6 foot something slugger who was a Jew got up to bat, he was counteracting stereotypes, that Jews were weak, that Jews were, bookish. He was like, we are who we are. We're whoever we happen to be. And I happen to be big and strong and can hit the ball a mile. And so Jews in Baseball is a story about how, the iconic American cultural institution, which is baseball, is a lens through which we can look at the American experience, the American immigrant experience, the idea that a despised and reviled immigrant group can make its way into the mainstream through doing something really well that is iconically American. That's jazz, that's baseball, that's what we do when our country does something well.
Yeah, well, very well said. And again, one of the reasons why we've become good friends and why I love your films so much is because they always pull out this story about humanity, about these people and the struggles that they had and what they had to overcome and some of the things that they were never able to overcome in some cases, to show that, as for you call it the human condition. We're all flawed human beings trying to do our best, hopefully. That's what Zilosophy is all about. Why I started it is to try and do my best and tell that story in real time so that I could hopefully inspire other people to do the same. I've got this theory that if everybody just tried to do their absolute best, be the best person they could be one day at a time, 7.5, 8 billion people, we'd all be fine in a really short amount of time. But it's a simple thing to say and a very hard thing to do. So what I can do is just do my best. And that's why I enjoy you telling the raw stories of these people and the struggles that they had. One of my favorites of yours, probably my favorite, is Aka Doc Pomus, who's a guy that most people don't know, never heard of. I hadn't heard of him until you told me about your film. Here's a guy who wrote Save the Last Dance for Me, This Magic Moment, Viva Las Vegas, and like 30 other giant hits that you all know. And really, he was just a Jewish kid with polio from, was it Brooklyn?
Yeah, from Brooklyn. He lost the use of his legs when he was 6 years old. He was on crutches in a wheelchair his whole life. And yet, or maybe not yet, maybe because of that, he lived the most glamorous, wonderful, romantic, fantastic life and transformed American culture. Jerome Felder from Brooklyn who renamed himself Doc Pomus because he wanted to be a blues man. And that was the bluesiest name he could come up with.
And because he was hiding from his parents, he didn't want them to know he was sneaking into blues clubs singing when he was a kid.
Leaning on his crutches, was singing with the greatest African-American blues artists in New York.
Yeah.
Belting out the blues. The guy recorded 78s, like 70 of them or something. He recorded blues as a blues artist. This heavy-set Jewish kid, Jerome Felder from Brooklyn on crutches. And he becomes really good at singing, but he, more important, becomes really good at writing songs. So he's writing these blues songs, and they're funny, and they're deep, and they're moving, and they're dirty, and they're people start asking him to write songs for them. Ray Charles, he writes for Ray Charles. He writes Lonely Avenue, this amazing Ray Charles song. He starts writing for the Drifters. The guys at Atlantic Records are like, this guy's got some talent. We need some songs. He writes, the Drifters have hits with This Magic Moment and Sweets for My Sweet and Save the Last Dance for Me and all these other Doc Pomus songs he writes with his, another Jewish kid from Brooklyn, Morty Schumann. Doc and Morty are writing these songs and rock and roll happens. And the rock and rollers need songs. So they start peddling their songs, and before you know it, they've got, number one hit after number one hit. Marries a beautiful Broadway singer, dancer, has a great, romantic, fabulous life, moves to the suburbs.
The American dream.
You got it.
And to say, how does this kid sing the blues? Well, you could say that no one felt the blues more than a kid like that who got polio when he was 6 and was a Jewish kid in Brooklyn. And sure, there's a lot of Jews there, but as you know, I mean, there Jews wherever have always been sort of picked on and ridiculed here and there. So I'm sure he took it for being Jewish. He took it for having polio. He took punishment for everything, for just being who he was. And
Just being a human being, you've got
right,
the blues much of the time. It just happens, you know. And he was in a household with a lot of shouting and whatever. It's just a normal adolescent life. He's lying in his bed, unable to get up because he's got polio. You know, he turns on the radio, and what does he hear? But Big Joe Turner, the great blues shouter. He's like, that's what I want to do.
yeah, that's
Most of us would say that's great music. He says that's
right.
what I want to be.
Well, that's the thing. Like you must have had that moment as a filmmaker of like even maybe when you were very young, like, oh my God, that's what I was put here to do.
Yeah, no, my folks brought me. I grew up outside of Boston, and we went to the art cinema in the 1970s, and we saw a movie called Harlan County, USA, about coal miners. And I remember watching that film, thinking, "Oh my God, this film, a beautiful movie, won the Academy Award." I ended up working for the filmmaker who made it.
Wow.
That was my first job in film. And we made another film that won another Academy Award called American Dream. So, but these it just happened. My folks were like, "Hey, this movie got good reviews. Let's go see it." And it is, for me, the beautiful thing about getting to make documentaries is that I get to drop into people's lives that I otherwise wouldn't have any permission to drop in on,
Sure.
and learn stuff from people and ask big open-ended questions. I could look at you and I could say, what do you do? Who are you? Tell
Right.
me about your life. And I have an excuse to do that. And usually we'll bring along a really good cinematographer who will shoot it well. And then we have a beautiful editor, my longtime filmmaking partner, Amy Linton, who has edited everything I've ever done practically. And we'll then sew it all together and tell a story. And that's, to me, I pinch myself. Well, not too hard, but I'm amazed that I get to actually do this, that I get to drop in. I get to say, I want to make a movie about my favorite Italian cookbook author, Marcella Hazan.
Yeah.
And I have an excuse to dial up and talk with her wonderful widow, Victor, and say, I was thinking that Marcella's story would be a good story for a film. And he says, yeah, let's do that. Oh, I'll be in New York. He lives where you live, in Sarasota, Florida. He was going to be in New York. And I said, you're 90, 91 years old. You're going to be in New York in a couple weeks. Let's get a camera. I couldn't afford it. I hadn't raised any money. I still haven't raised any money. And if anybody out there has any money they want to send for a film about the great Marcella Hazan, go to willowpondfilms.com. Find me. I would love to hear from you. But I sit down with a camera and for 3.5 hours interview this amazing man about his wife's amazing life. She changed the way that we eat. Marcella Hazan wrote the classic Italian cookbook and a bunch of other books, sold millions of copies. I cook her food 2-3 times a week. I cook from her books. And when I think about how to cook something, in the back of my head, it's like, what would Marcella do? How would Marcella approach this? What does Marcella say? She's like a presence in our kitchen. And I think this is true for a lot of people. She basically said, and this goes back to history, her basic message is, listen to tradition. Listen to how we've done this. Listen to how it is that people who really know what they're doing have prepared this dish. In America, it's easy to go to the supermarket and buy a box of something and stick it in the microwave, or go to a fast food joint and get a bag of food and eat it in the car while you're listening to the radio. She's like, sit down, prepare stuff from really good ingredients, think about where the ingredients come from, prepare them simply and the way that people have done it well. Listen to the people who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so I'm the beginning of doing this, and I'm loving it. It's like I get to go drop in on amazing cooks, people who knew her, people who cooked her food. I dropped in on Jacques Pepin.
Yeah. Wow.
It was like, I got an excuse to go to his house and ask him questions about cooking.
That's amazing.
How lucky is
Quite a
that?
character himself.
So yeah, and for me, the story is not just a story about one good cookbook writer who sold a lot of cookbooks. It's a story of a person like Doc Pomus, who was injured as a kid, lost the use of her hand, became a scientist. Marcella has 2 PhDs, never cooked a day in her life until she got married to an Italian American man who wanted food on the table every lunch. She had to figure out how to cook Italian food in America with a bum right hand that doesn't work so well. She's so brilliant, this person with 2 PhDs, that she figures it out. How can I reverse engineer what I ate as a kid here in New York City and prepare a tomato sauce that's going to taste the way a tomato sauce should taste?
Yeah.
This is a story. So it's all, to me, in all these movies, about a human being and their story. And it's about having that story take you on a journey, and the journey has unexpected twists and turns, and the journey tells you something about how a life can be lived, and how, and not necessarily that the person's a hero all the time. Sometimes they can be cranky, or sometimes they can have bad habits, but it's a good life to learn from.
That's what I love about your films, is that they're so relatable. When I watch them, I see myself in that character on some level. And I think with the Doc Pomus thing, it's like, here's this guy that overcame these great challenges to have the American dream, but at the same time, you're still telling the stories of the struggles he had after achieving the American dream, because you don't achieve the American dream and all your problems go away. You're still a human being. You're still facing challenges. He had several of them in his marriages. And, of course, I don't know the Marcella story yet, but
You will, if we're lucky, we can get to tell it. But Doc has, he's got problems in love. He's got problems in finances. So Doc Pomus becomes the great songwriter. He has #1 hit after #1 hit. And then it's the mid-60s, and along come the Beatles and Bob Dylan and people who wrote songs that they performed themselves. Who needs a songwriter anymore when
Right.
Lennon and McCartney are writing their own songs and singing them? When Bob Dylan is writing his own songs, and they're pretty good, and singing them.
Right.
People start writing their own songs. What happens to the fellow songwriters that he's working alongside? People like Carole King, or Paul Simon, or Neil Sedaka, or these people who are in the Brill Building writing these songs. They say, well, I guess I'll go off and have a career as a singer-songwriter.
Right.
But if you're a heavy-set guy on crutches who doesn't look like a rock star, you can't do that. That wasn't a choice for Doc. So the bottom falls out of the songwriting business, and he has to make a living. So how does he make a living? He becomes a gambler. He runs poker games
Right.
out of his apartment and hanging out with some shady characters, because that's the shady part of the world.
Sure.
You can't make this stuff up. If you had invented this character, of course he comes out of it at the end, and ends up being able to go back into songwriting. And at that point, he starts to mentor younger songwriters. So John Lennon himself comes over for songwriting advice. Bob Dylan comes for lyrics when he's stuck on a lyric. Bob Dylan asking Doc Pomus for advice on lyrics. Lou Reed sits at his feet and learns from the great man. And so does a whole generation of young songwriters who realize that they've got this Buddha, this mentor they can go to and learn from. And so Doc ends up, not only having this fantastic career that has ups and very big downs and then another up, but he also ends up leaving an imprint on all of these lives and all these people who he influenced. And that's a story that, as I was saying, you can't make this stuff up, right? It's like you could, if you wrote him as fiction, people would say that's ridiculous. That would never happen. Marcella Hazan, my, beloved food mentor, you can't make this stuff up. You can't make up this kid in Italy who's got 2 PhDs and has never cooked, who comes to America with another Italian kid who had to leave with his Jewish family during the war, who they get married, they fall in love. She's stuck in New York. She can't use her science, so she ends up becoming a cook. This doesn't make any sense because she wasn't a cook. Right. She ends up giving cooking lessons because she's really good at teaching, because she's a scientist and she's a great cook. She ends up being profiled in the New York Times by Craig Claiborne, the great food writer, and people want to take her cooking classes. She becomes so popular with her cooking classes that she gets a cookbook deal. She becomes a best-selling cookbook author, and ends up being able to move back to Italy and live in a palazzo in Venice and give cooking classes for the next couple decades. And famous people and not so famous people come and learn at her kitchen table. And she is not bubbly and effusive and sweet and telegenic. She's crabby. And she says, you know, listen to what I'm doing. And people would be like, how do you know when the dish is ready, Marcella? She'd say, when it's ready. You know, she was tough as nails. She would, so I had the opportunity to meet her once. My wife and I, who both have been cooking her food forever, signed up for a one evening cooking class in, Connecticut. We drove out to the suburbs. Kids got, babysitting, went out to the suburbs to meet Marcella. But Valerie, my wife, has been waiting for years to ask her a question about a sauce that we've been making from one of her books that sometimes is fantastic and sometimes just falls apart. She's like, Marcella, why does this sauce fall apart sometimes? Marcella looked at her and said, it does not fall apart. That was it. I should have thought back then, movie, we got to make a movie about this person. Right. 15 years later, I get to start.
At the right time for the right reasons. But isn't that great? It's such a great, just that moment of this human story, this buildup of this woman that you've idolized, and you've been dying to ask this question, and you ask the question, and it's just, yeah.
Sorry, you're wrong.
Yeah. I thought we're going to say the sauce doesn't fall apart. You fall apart. That's probably what she thought. Maybe she didn't verbalize it.
Whatever it was, it was just, she knows how to do it right. And she doesn't suffer fools.
I think that what's so great, what I really appreciate about the way you tell stories is that you don't hide that we're all flawed and that we're all struggling with something, many of us with many things. And again, that's why I do this, to sort of try and publicly talk about the things that I struggle with and that I try to overcome so that I can bring my best to my community, and then, all the way up to the global community, starting in a small community. And to me, the study of humanity has always been fascinating. And we talked about, Doc Pomus knowing at a young age what he wanted to do. Something I haven't shared a whole lot is that I was in this seminar life course called The Forum at the age of 16. And, this guy, Werner Erhard, who had started the whole thing, was this pretty controversial thing. Then at one point, quick version of the story, I end up on stage with just him. I hadn't shared in front of the group at all. Now there's not only 1,000 people in the seminar, but 2,000 people in observing. And I take the microphone, not even knowing what's happening. He said, do you have something to say? I said, I must. And I started sharing openly in front of these people how much my parents meant to me. And I started crying, and my parents were there. And right in front of the whole room, I saw that I transformed the room just by sharing my authentic emotions and thoughts at that time. And I knew at that moment that I had a gift for that, and that that's what I would do one day. And it took me 30 years to actually finally do it.
Well, that's a beautiful story, and thank you for sharing it. And the thing is that sharing stories is an act, not just of personal liberation and therapy, but it's an act of social change. I've just been working on a film that was on PBS a week or two ago called Bedlam. It's a story of it's a film I produced with a director named Ken Rosenberg, who's a psychiatrist, about people with serious mental illness and the struggles and how our country has really abandoned our most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty hard film to watch because it's about people whose lives have been really, really challenged by these awful illnesses. But there's an optimistic part of this story, which is that Ken, the director of this film, was a family member of his sister had schizophrenia. He never talked about this. This is a guy who's a psychiatrist. He went into psychiatry because his sister was sick, yet he never told anybody that this was the case because he was ashamed, like many people are who have got people with mental illness in their family. There was shame and stigma associated. And he realized halfway into making this film, and with the help of a community of filmmaking partners, including me, that he had to tell his own story. And not only that, but the people in our film who were brave enough to tell their stories had to tell their own stories. Yeah. So by talking about, hey, you know what? I'm one of the 15 million Americans families that has got somebody in the family with a serious mental illness. That's an act of liberation and of social change. Because until we come out of the closet, as it were, until we talk about, throw off the stigma and the shame and talk about our real experiences, we can't make things better. And that was the motivating factor behind making this movie. And I think the movie will help make things better. It'll help people have conversations they need to have. And that's what we can do as filmmakers, is we can make people aware of the emotional experience of other people, and which will remind us of the emotional experience in our own lives. And it will help us have conversations that can lead to making a better world.
Yeah, I hope and pray that you're right, that that film will help. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that mental health is a giant issue in this country that goes undiscovered, or not undiscovered, unaddressed. To me, these mass shootings and crazy things that people do to each other, of course, gun control, and there's part of that is part of the is part of the issue, but the real core issue is that the mental health of your average American is not that great, and we're not doing anything about it. And we all need mental health support, whether we have a serious illness or we just have an illness called being a human being.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. A large number of us are going to need some kind of mental health support in our lives. A smaller number of us, but a
Yeah.
significant number of us are going to have a serious illness that's really going to be debilitating and cause us, real issues in our lives. And part of the problem we have in our society is that we don't have universal health care. If everyone had health care, we could diagnose stuff early. We could make sure that you're getting preventive medicine. We could make sure that we're getting looked in on, and checked under the hood. We do that with our cars.
Yeah.
We make sure that our batteries are working well and all the other stuff. We don't do that with our humans because our medical system is this crazy patchwork of insurance things, or no, people don't have insurance. If everyone had health care, it would make a huge difference. But on the subject of mass shootings you're talking about, we don't have more mental illness in this country than they have in other countries. We have pretty much the same, but what we don't have is health care, and we don't have a good system for caring for people, and we have too many darn guns. You have the same number of people with mental illness in countries where they've had one mass shooting in the last 10 years. And in this country, we have so many mass shootings, we've lost track. So we have to think about looking after each other, and looking after each other isn't just a matter of feeding and caring for the people that are immediately in our lives. It's about creating a culture in which we really think about the implications of what we do. And if we support bad policies that get people killed, we're doing harm to our neighbors. We need to make this a safer, more, nurturing, warmer, more compassionate, more welcoming community. And this is what we do in our own families, and we should extend that beyond our families to our communities and to our whole country. We need to be understanding, welcoming, and recognizing the humanity of other people. And we started this conversation talking about New York City.
Yeah.
One of the things that's wonderful about cities is that we need to deal with each other. And in needing to deal with each other, we negotiate difficult and complicated problems. And that's the best thing that we can do, is we can figure out, I don't agree with you on this, but
Right.
I'm not going to hit you. I'm going to talk to you.
Well,
I'm going to figure it out.
that's what I want to get to. I'm glad you sort of went there, because I've been sort of the last 10, 15 minutes wondering if we should go to this part about a little bit of a political philosophical discussion within the framework of this humanity that we're talking about your films, about Zilosophy, and why we do this, because we want people to be their best. And you tell these stories about these great struggles, and there's always sort of this way that they find their way through it. And maybe, but not completely, because that's not how it always works, right? So I think that it's great what you're bringing up, and I think that to me, that's the key of America moving forward, is We don't have to always like each other. We don't have to always agree. But how do we learn to respect each other even when we disagree and we don't like each other? That's that's the key to the whole thing. So I want to bring that up in the context of I know you pretty well. We've been friends for years. I know you're a very liberal person politically, and I respect that because for you, I know that you come from a very the pure, what I'll call pure liberalism, which is standing for all of humanity. I think in the last few years, we've seen sort of same thing we saw on the right wing when Obama was in office. You had all these extremists pop up on the right all of a sudden. And we're seeing that now on the left, that we've got these sort of militant, almost fascist liberals that are saying, if you don't think like me, then get out of here. And to me, that's insane. We cannot have a country or a world that does that to each other. We have
Yeah,
to.
but I don't think, if I could cut you off, I
Sure.
don't think you can make the equivalent there. The people who are on the left who are saying we should be, we should welcome immigrants into our country, we should have health care for everybody. These are not radical ideas. These
No,
are human
but I'm not
ideas.
talking
People on
about
the right who are saying racism is okay and that there's conspiracies and pizza parlors to steal children, these people are loons and they're doing it to serve the wealthy. So we can't make, it's a false equivalence, Michael. I understand that we need to listen to each other, but we should really not listen to those lunatics on the right wing who really are about hatred.
Peter, there are lunatics on the left-wing extreme too. This is my point.
Not as many, and they're not as dangerous.
Peter, you can defend your
We have Nazi fascists who are going and burning people. We have people who are the people in Charlottesville, Virginia. There's no equivalent on the left.
That's why I wanted to get to this, because I know you're a very liberal person.
It's not that I'm liberal. It's that I keep my eyes open and I actually learn and study and read the newspaper and know what's going on. We have people who call the newspaper fake news. Those people are wrong. They are liars. They're Nazis. Who calls journalists the enemy of the people? Nazis do. So let's not make an equivalence between the left and the right. The right is evil and bad right now. There's some people on the left who are dumb, but they're not evil.
Can I speak now?
Yeah, but don't equate people who are on the left with Nazis who are poisoning our culture.
Please don't tell me what I can and can't say. That's not fair. We're friends. I should be.
I understand that.
But I want to say
my dad went to World War II to fight against Nazis. I take this stuff very personally.
I get it, and I know you do.
I'm a Jew. They killed a lot of us. We have them in America now. They are not the equivalent of the people on the left who say we should have universal health care. The people on the right are bad.
Letting me make my point. Can I make a point?
Yes, of course you can.
There are extremists on the left nowadays who preach tolerance and are incredibly intolerant of other people's views. Now, what we're talking about in the concept, I'm talking about a philosophical discussion of human beings. We are all flawed. We all make mistakes. We all say and do things we wish we hadn't, and then hopefully we learn from it. So my point is, you can say whatever you want about one extreme being better than the other. To me, you're not going to convince me of that. To me, both extremes are wrong. Where we meet is in the middle when we talk, like you just said about New York City. You're not going to agree with all the people in New York City. You're going to have all kinds of different views about all kinds of things, but somehow you find a way forward together that makes sense. And it's not by arguing and pointing out the flaws in other people. It's by accepting your own inauthentic thoughts and feelings and allowing the other person to express theirs, no matter how wrong you think they are. And yes, of course, there has to be a line somewhere you draw where you just stop accepting something. And that's why this is a difficult conversation, even for you and I as friends, and why I appreciate you taking part in it publicly, because this is what I want to show people, that you and I may not agree on certain things. We don't have to, but we have to respect each other. We have to give the other person a chance to say their point before we start defending ours. I have always respected you and will always respect you because I know you well enough to know that you stand for the good in people. I know this about you. We're very good friends, and I know that about you. So you can say anything to me that I don't agree with. That's not going to change that. And this is my point. I have to accept that you and I may differ in opinion on certain things while still understanding that I know you well enough as a person to know that you stand for the good of humanity and the good of the country. And we don't always have to agree for me to respect that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that listening is super important. And that's at the heart of the craft that I practice. I'm a documentary maker. My job is to ask people questions and hear what they have to say and be surprised by what they tell me.
Yeah.
I also am very committed to telling the truth. There's never a moment in any of my films that I will knowingly ever say something that is not true. The truth is the most important thing there is. And so where we differ is about the people on the extremes is perhaps we also share this thought, which is that the most important thing is that people should tell the truth. People should not lie. Right now, we have a head of state who lies so often that we've lost track. The people that good journalists have been keeping track, it was at 20,000 public lies as of a little while ago. We have news channels that people watch where they tell blatant lies. This is not a left-right thing, it's a right thing. There are people who say that the news media, the hardworking, well-trained, brilliant journalists, the mainstream media, they call them fake. They're not fake. They're journalists. They're looking for the truth. So I think that the quest for the truth is super important, and the need to report what really happened, painful, complicated, mixed up, good and bad as it is super important. And the other day in the New York Times, a wonderful newspaper that I subscribe to, there was an article about Nazi-era Holland, the Netherlands. And I'm like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Why am I reading about 1944 in the Netherlands? But the Minister of Culture for the Netherlands back then, knowing that they were occupied by Nazi Germany, said to his people, this is a Minister of Culture in exile, he wasn't in, said to the people of Holland, write down what you're seeing. Keep journals, write letters, and hide them. Keep them. In the midst of this, Anne Frank hears this. Anne Frank hiding in an attic, Jewish girl trying to not be killed with her family. And she's been keeping a diary that was very personal and that was sort of about her travails as a teenage kid. She heard this and said, oh, what I'm writing matters. And she changed the nature of her journal and started writing the greatest memoir ever written in the history of humanity, probably, this diary of a kid hiding out from the Nazis that became a landmark piece of literature and a siren call to, about dealing with oppression and evil. This guy not only inspired Anne Frank, he inspired hundreds, maybe thousands of other people in the Netherlands to write down their memories, to keep journals and hide them. And they gathered them up in an archive, and you can now read these. They're online. They're amazing. Stories by people. Some of these people you wouldn't like. Some of these people are Nazi collaborators. Some of these people were hiding from the Nazis, but they wrote down their memories. And writing down your memories and keeping track of history is the most powerful thing we can do, because if we record human knowledge, we can learn from that human knowledge and we can get better from it.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I agree with the whole thing that you're saying, which is the truth is really what's important. My point is that as you go towards extremes, the truth starts to get distorted to prove your point, right? Which is why I've become more and more of a centrist, because I want to be able to talk to both sides. To me, it's crazy, again, talk about something that's crazy. It's crazy that in a country that's supposed to be united, we stand, divided, we fall, that we're split 50-50 and there's sides. There are no sides as far as I'm concerned. Americans, that's the side where we all are Americans. We have to find a way to talk to each other, understanding that there's going to be certain people that are triggering certain things that are incredibly extreme and doing dangerous things. And to me, I see that on both sides. Now, you can say that one side is more unbalanced than the other, and that's fine. But to me, one small thing that's extreme on any side is wrong. And we need to find a way that we work together to do what's in the best of the greater good, which is why you and I, no matter what we ever disagree on, will always
Mhm.
agree on that we should always try to make choices that serve the greater good,
we
right?
should we should have these conversations more often. I think
Yeah,
that's the message
that's
here.
why I'm doing it now. I don't talk about politics a lot, and like I said, I thought about it for minutes before I went there because I know how passionate you are about your political stances.
They're
But
not political stances, they're reasoned conclusions from studying the world and history. And I am motivated by a desire to make sure that everybody's lives are good. And if that's a and I hope that and I hope that coming out of this awful pandemic we're in now, the shock of having to deal with something this terribly epically bad will make us actually turn the binoculars the other direction and have a big picture view of how we should organize our lives and how we should operate our nation. And hopefully, if something good comes out of this, it'll be that we actually do some deep thinking.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And that's why, again, I've sort of allowed this to be directed in this direction because I want people to see good friends, good people that can have discussions that maybe get a little bit intense here and there and realize that we come out on the same side on the big picture. Maybe not on the minutia, we won't always come out on the same side, but let's find a way as a country, as a humanity, to come out on the same side. We don't encourage other people to be better by sticking our finger in their face and telling them that they're wrong and they suck and they should go away.
No, it's also effective, even if you sincerely believe that. I agree with you, and we need to be respectful, and we need to recognize that people who we think are different from us are in fact more similar to us than we realize. Which is why I feel so strongly that we need to be the pluralistic, democratic, multi-ethnic, messy culture that gave us jazz, rock and roll, better baseball,
Yeah.
and all that stuff. And it all has to do with embracing what's best about America. And what's best about America is our diversity and our messiness.
Amen. I wholeheartedly agree with you. And you know that because we've had several conversations. I
And
think,
I have to say, this is such a joy. We could go on forever, but I actually have a film or two I'm working on right now, and people are waiting to hear back from me because we've got some, even in this crazy moment, we're trying to manage some film production,
yeah,
in a
getting content to people is
way.
important right now.
So I'm going to say thank you so much for this conversation, which has really been a joy. It's really nice to see you again.
Great
Um,
to see you, man.
and and it's really nice to see the view behind you, which you probably forget about most of the day. But
No, I never
man,
forget that. I never forget that.
enjoy that, that gorgeous place you're living in, and may we all be really safe and healthy and come out of this thing intact as well as we can.
Amen. Well said.
Maybe it's not too late. Maybe you could make my world a brighter place.
My podcast with Peter Miller. What a great guy. I hope you check out his films. They're really inspiring, really raw and human. And I hope that this podcast was that too. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I got a lot because, again, when I'm forced to practice that, even some of my best friends are going to say things that I don't necessarily agree with and necessarily like at times, I have to remember how much I love that person. And I can tell you, there are very few people in the world that I love and respect more than Peter. He's an amazing guy and an amazing friend, and a super talented storyteller and filmmaker. So thank you, Peter, for being on. I appreciate everything you do to try and make this world a better place. And I hope that we can continue to work together on projects so that we can actually do that and make this world the place that we all know it can be one day. That's why I do this. That's why I left the entertainment business and then fell back into this part of the entertainment business by making content about doing our best and trying to build the world that we always wanted, and really to give kids the tools to build the world that we always wanted, by working on ourselves and being our best. So thanks to our sponsor, Fresh Food to Go by Zildjian Catering. You can call them at 941-363-1709, or you can order online at zildjiancatering.com and click on Fresh Food to Go. Amazing food, new menu every 2 weeks. Check them out. There's the GoFundMe. That's Free Zilosophy Talks for Heroes, Kids, and Families on Lockdown. Please support that, donate, share it, and help me identify heroes, kids, and families that need support. I can jump on a Zoom call with them as myself, or we can bring one of the characters from the show in. That seems to be a big hit. That show is Zilosophy TV with Uncle Z and Friends. It's on YouTube. Episode 2 is coming soon. I'm editing now. Lots of social distancing fun with Old School Bobby, Rich Hader, Eggplant Parm with Nana Z, all kinds of fun stuff. Zilosophy on Golf is available on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. I hope you check it out. I hope you read it and it helps you during this tough time. The theme song is Surf by Captain Blackheart, my good friends Dino and Erwin. You can find Captain Blackheart on iTunes and Spotify. Check them out. To find out more about me and Zilosophy, visit zilosophy.org. Working on a refresh of that website at some point when I can get to it. But there's a lot of information there now that you can check out. If you have any suggested topics or guests, email me at info@zilosophy.org or message me at Zilosophy4all. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking part. Thank you for trying to do your best to make this world a better place. I hope we can all do that, and I hope that one day we succeed. I love you all. I'm Z, and you're welcome.